The Bishop of Charlotte, North Carolina, issues a new edict to further restrict the traditional Latin Mass and sets off a firestorm. Liturgy expert Peter Kwasniewski is here with analysis, and Sebastien Lai, the son of the imprisoned Catholic democracy advocate Jimmy Lai, is here to talk about accepting the Bradley Prize in Washington, D.C. on behalf of his father, who is still being held captive by the Chinese government. Papal Posse member Robert Arroyo talks about the persecution of Christians in the 21st century and his brand new book. And I talked to comic legend Tom Dreesen about the lessons Frank Sinatra taught him the world over. Begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important show for you this week. If you'd like to comment, send me an X post. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, and you can always find us at Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Bishop Michael Martin of the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, issued a directive to fully comply with the late Pope Francis's crackdown on the traditional Latin Mass this week. The directive restricts the TLM to one non-parish within his diocese, down from 4. What is Bishop Martin trying to achieve, and will other dioceses follow suit? Here with analysis of the story, liturgy expert, author, and composer, Peter Kwasniewski. Peter, thank you for being here. Bishop Martin calls this limitation on the old rite an effort to promote the unity of the Church, Peter. How does cracking down further on a valid form of the ancient Catholic liturgy promote unity, does it?
It doesn't promote unity at all. In fact, the 4 pastors of the parishes affected by this decree, it's being removed, that is, the Latin Mass is being removed from all 4 of these places. These pastors wrote a respectful but passionate plea to the bishop before he released his edict, begging him not to do this because they knew it was coming, and saying that they have no problems with unity in their parish. The faithful are happy to worship at either form of the Mass. They go, some of them, back and forth between them. The pastor said, we simply don't have a problem. And if you do what you're proposing to do, then we will have many problems. We'll have over 1,000 people who are very upset, who have done nothing wrong, who are not calling into question the papacy or the last council as a valid council or anything. They just want to worship in spirit and truth in this beautiful, venerable form that nourished the spiritual lives of so many countless saints in the Catholic Church.
Well, and they want to worship in their parishes, Peter. And this is the particularly cruel bit of Pope Francis's legislation. You know, Traditionis Custodes really expels these people who follow the Latin Mass, want to celebrate the Latin Mass, expels them from their own parishes. They're not allowed in a parish setting. So Bishop Martin says he's just following Pope Francis's legislation here, and these restrictions were already underway. Your reaction, and I asked the Papal Posse about this on my podcast this week. Why do you think just when a new pope has arrived on the scene that a local bishop would institute what seems to be a draconian cram down and expulsion of the Latin Mass?
Yes, it's very peculiar. And I'm just going to say the timing of it, in the manner in which the bishop writes, indicates that he's rushing to push through something that he's afraid Pope Leo XIV wouldn't agree with. Pope Leo XIV says he wants to be a bridge builder. He wants to bring unity to a divided church. Apparently, the cardinals in the pre-conclave meetings were talking about the need to overcome factions and divisions. This is not the way that that's going to happen. But more particularly, the 4 pastors who wrote to the bishop begging him not to go through with this decree, pointed out that he's implementing Traditionis Custodes more strictly than it needs to be. They pointed out to him that he could have requested further extensions, which have been requested and granted for other dioceses. He could have established more than one non-parish site. He could have done that. There's nothing that would prevent him from doing that. There's nothing that says you have to have only one non-parish site. And finally, he could have invited in the Fraternity of St. Peter or the Institute of Christ the King, as other dioceses have done since Traditionis Custodes, in order to provide 24/7, 365 days a year pastoral care for the faithful attached to the traditional Roman rite. He could have done any of those things, as his other brother bishops have done, but he chose not to, which means that he wanted to own this. This is an ideological move. He really believes in eliminating the Latin Mass.
What do you make of the notion at the heart of Bishop Martin's efforts here? What really, the narrative that's at the center of it is that the traditional Latin Mass community was fomenting a movement to deny Vatican II's liturgical reforms.
Actually, the strange thing about Bishop Martin is that he wrote not only an edict that was dated, I have it printed here, May 23rd, also issued a 4-page document of clarifications, answers to objections.
Yeah.
And in this document, he admits that most of the faithful who attend the TLM are in complete communion with the magisterium of the Church and her supreme pontiffs and do not deny the legitimacy of the liturgical reform. He admits that. And he even says, I'm aware that some of these Catholics may leave the church or may leave the diocese, and that many of them may stop donating, but I'm okay with that. I accept that as the price that we have to pay in order to get rid of the traditional Latin Mass. It's heartless, and it's not the heart of a shepherd. Absolutely. Can you imagine a bishop saying, I don't care if people go elsewhere, if they leave the church, if they stop donating, I just want to get rid of the liturgy that they love.
It's unbelievable. Peter, there was a leaked letter which turns out to be a draft of upcoming liturgical restrictions that Bishop Martin sought to impose on the Diocese of Charlotte, but I guess he killed it. He squashed the letter and said, no, we're not releasing it now, but only after the backlash. Among his wish list is the banishment of kneeling during communion, the end of altar rails, the striking of Latin from the liturgy, even in the new Mass. Now, look, you're a liturgy expert. How does that comport with Vatican II? Did it ever call for the banishment of Latin, Peter?
Yeah, of course not. I mean, this is one of those urban legends, that people say, well, after Vatican II, the church said no more Latin. Well, Vatican II itself said, preserve the Latin. It says everybody should know how to say or sing together in Latin the Lord's Prayer and the ordinary of the Mass, the Gloria, the Credo, the Sanctus, the Agnus Dei. And subsequent legislation has only underlined all of these things. So the amazing thing about the leaked letter, and it's a huge document, it's like a 20-page document, he does not only what you mentioned, but he wants to ban classical vestments. He says priests can't wear lace, they can't wear fiddlebacks. He wants to ban crucifixes and candles on the altar. He wants to ban the priests praying private vesting prayers before Mass. He wants to ban veils for the women. I mean, it's absurd. Every single thing that he lists is contrary either to standing liturgical legislation, standing for the Novus Ordo, or it's contrary to customs that have never been condemned.
Yeah, I was stunned by the granularity of it, Peter. It's so specific and petty. I mean, down to, I will tell you, full confession, I have, because I bounce between the old Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo when we can't make it or I'm traveling, I will say at the moment of consecration, my Lord, my God. Well, that was what St. Thomas said, the apostle, when Jesus appeared to him. That is a traditional practice, and it's in the old rite. It's a response. If I want to quietly say that to myself during a Novus Ordo Mass, frankly, that's none of the bishop's or anybody's business. That's my spiritual life. And yet, he calls that out and says, you can't do that anymore. You can't say it. The St. Michael prayer at the end of Mass, instituted by the last Pope Leo, suddenly stricken. We don't want that anymore. Your reaction to the overall, it gives you insight into the mind of who you're dealing with, yes?
Yes. What we're dealing with, unfortunately, is a Franciscan formed in the 1970s which is the only thing worse than a Jesuit formed in the 1970s. I mean, if I could put it that way. He entered the Jesuit. He entered Bishop Martin, the Franciscans, in 1979. So certainly the spirit of the 1970s is very much there. And if you look at what he did as chaplain of the Catholic chaplaincy at Duke University some years ago when he was in the Raleigh diocese, he was trying to implement exactly the same policies. He's learned nothing. He hasn't paid attention to the fact that there's a huge vibe shift, as some people call it, going on in the Catholic Church. The young people are tired of kumbaya and guitars and jamborees. They want sacredness, reverence, kneeling, all these sorts of things. He's completely out of step with the times, the signs of the times.
Peter, I have about 3 minutes left. I have to get to this, and you've hit on where I want to go here. We've seen this kind of rough and frankly tyrannical treatment of others who are devoted to the old Latin Mass. Tell me what you're hearing from those who frequent the Latin Mass, particularly the young. You know, I keep running into young families, young guys, predominantly young men. You see them as you travel the country. They are going to the old Mass because they want the old traditions, they want the ancient ways, and many are now telling me they're drifting to Orthodoxy or Eastern rites. What is the challenge here for these bishops? Not only this bishop, but all these bishops.
Yeah, the challenge is they need to wake up to the fact that what speaks to people in 2025, what speaks to them in a postmodern age, when there's so much nihilism and secularism and worldliness and emptiness in people's lives, what speaks to them is rich, symbolic language, pageantry, silence, adoration, Gregorian chant, these things which are, you could say, countercultural, not necessarily in themselves, but right now they certainly are. These things are powerful incentives to piety and to prayer and to an interior life, which is very much against the grain. And so the bishops that are in older generations, they have to realize we're not fighting the battles of the 1960s or 70s anymore. We're in a totally different situation. And if Bishop Martin doesn't want to see every priest and every lay person of his diocese alienated from him and really just embittered about him, which is the direction things are going in, he should do a 180-degree turn, apologize for what he's done, rescind all of this legislation, and just let the Diocese of Charlotte be healthy and conservative, and resign if he doesn't want that kind of a diocese.
Well, at a time when churches around the world are trying to figure out how to get young people to come in, you've got them crashing through your doors, but they want the orthodoxy and they want the old rites and the old ways, and you tell them, nope, no room for you, we're shutting that down. In fact, this is madness. Will this blow up in Charlotte and provoke a response by Pope Leo XIV, or does the Pope just sort of look the other way and let this play out diocese by diocese? What's your gut?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you for a fact that there are already canonical recourses going from the Diocese of Charlotte to Rome, from clergy and lay people who are saying our rights are being trampled on. We have an autocratic bishop who doesn't listen to us. He's completely unsynodal. He hasn't visited a single parish that offers the traditional Latin Mass. He hasn't gotten to know anybody. He did all of this fresh into his office. Conservatives wait for years before they change where one candlestick is, and then the liberals come in and they sweep everything away in 2 days. This is the way that this bishop has been. I don't know if Leo XIV, I don't know how he's going to react to this. If he really cares about peace and unity, he needs to find a way to walk back the cruel and unjust and unpastoral provisions of Traditionis Custodes. He really does. And I think that, people may be forcing his hand, the French bishops too.
Yeah, it feels like this was a test case. You get the feeling this wasn't engineered in Charlotte, that this may have, other tentacles in it, but we'll see how it plays out. By the way, we did a deep dive of this issue and the entire crackdown on the Latin Mass around the world on the Posse over on Arroyo Grande podcast. You people should check it out. Peter, before we go, I must get your reaction to this story out of Germany. Apparently, German Catholics are being scandalized by a performance at the Paderborn Cathedral on the occasion of 1,250 years of something called Westphalia. Take a look. Peter, while the bishops are focused on banishing ancient Catholic worship from churches, why are modern dancers and headless chickens in diapers not a problem?
The Old Latin Mass is obviously much more dangerous than any amount of strange liturgical dances with headless chickens. That's the only answer that we could give. No, this is all of the same kind of modern nonsense that is really sickening to the faithful. I heard that over 20,000 German Catholics protested against this Paderborn exhibition, and in Germany to have 20,000 Catholics protest something, it's got to be pretty bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it forced the German bishops did come out and apologize for this outrage, but that's the least of their worries. And you had the German president there. I mean, to allow a sacred place of worship, of Catholic worship, to be used in this way, it's despicable. It's so horrible. But follow the work of Dr. Peter Kwasniewski at peterkwasniewski.com. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Raymond.
Catholic democracy advocate and media magnate Jimmy Lai has been jailed in Hong Kong since December of 2020. The Chinese regime claims he violated China's national security law for, among other things, his role in pro-democracy demonstrations in 2019. Well, this week, the Bradley Foundation will bestow on Jimmy Lai its Bradley Prize, which his son will receive on his behalf. Joining me now to discuss his father's fight for democracy, his ongoing imprisonment and trial, and the deterioration of freedom in Hong Kong is Jimmy's son, Sebastien Lai. Sebastien, welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here. You were here in Washington back in March, I believe, to meet with lawmakers and Trump administration officials to advocate to help hasten your father's release. Now, last year, just prior to his reelection, President Trump indicated that he would do what he could to help your father's release, saying he was 100% able, or would be 100% able, to secure Jimmy's release. What has been the fruit of that March visit? What are you hearing?
So thank you very much for having me. We met people from the NSC and state as well. And I think everybody is incredibly on side, and it's just, look, it's been 4 years. He's 77. He could die at any point. It's time to have him out. It's just, at this point, it's just cruelty what they're doing to him in Hong Kong, and he needs to be released immediately.
I thought I read, Sebastien, correct me if I'm wrong, President Trump said that he would be willing to make Jimmy's release, your father's release, a part of a negotiation with China. Did you pick that up? Have you heard that?
Yeah, I saw that, and it's given us so much hope. We've been incredibly grateful for the president's support, and as well as his moral clarity on my father's case. We're very, very hopeful.
Well, as you mentioned, your father is now 77 years old, a British national. Jimmy Lai has been in prison since 2020, held in solitary confinement in Hong Kong since at least 2023. We're really unsure. We don't have full confirmation. His trial, which was originally estimated to last about 90 days, has been ongoing, dragging on since December of 2023. Sebastien, how is your father's health, and what is the status of his case and the trial at this point?
So his trial's ongoing. As you mentioned, it was delayed multiple times, finally starting at the end of 2023. Meant to last 90 days. Obviously, it's lasted much more than 90 days. It's still not done now. Closing is going to happen in August. Sentencing probably sometimes in 2026, by which point it would have lasted 2 years. And my father would be 78, and he would have spent 5 years in jail, and actually in solitary confinement. So it's not, unfortunately, we are very worried about him. He's got diabetes. 15 days of solitary confinement is considered prolonged solitary confinement. He's been in there for more than 1,600 days. He can't go to mass. They blocked off Natural Light for him. I'm very, thank God he has faith, because it's his pillar. It's what holds him strong. On the stand, he was when he gave testimony, he physically was much more frail, weaker, but spiritually and intellectually still very strong. He knows that he did the right thing, and he knows that he did the right thing by God.
Just last week, in a letter to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, it was signed by 22 former prisoners who'd been detained abroad and their family members, and it urges the Prime Minister to act on Jimmy's release before it's too late. The signatories write, "We know firsthand the horrors of these cases and the reality of living every day with the knowledge you may never see your loved one again. We also know that resolving these cases and bringing British citizens home to the UK depends on robust, principled, strategic action by the UK government." Sebastien, as a British national yourself, you've requested a meeting with the Prime Minister. Have you received a response?
So I haven't been able to meet with the Prime Minister yet, unfortunately. You know, obviously it is disappointing. You know, again, this is an urgent case. My father doesn't have a lot of time left. We are in a situation now where, you know, as you've seen with the United States, we have incredible support. We have President Trump saying that he will do more than just speak up for my father, that he'll put actions behind words. And I really hope that our governments will do the same. You know, the British government will do the same, because in the end of the day, the freedoms that my father stood for are not, you know, are not freedoms that are just relevant to the UK or to Hong Kong. It's freedoms globally. And the fact that you have this man who has the courage to stay in Hong Kong and stand with his journalists, knowing full well that he could very well end up in jail for the rest of his life, but he stands there. I mean, isn't that someone that we should not only aspire to, but want to do all we can to free?
Yeah, and Sebastien, to put this in context, for those who may not know, your father was a leading media mogul in Hong Kong, a billionaire. He could easily have gotten on a jet and gotten out of Hong Kong when things started to go south. He made the decision to support the pro-democracy movement and then to be really an exemplar of faith, I would argue a white martyr for his faith and the cause of freedom. Do you think British diplomacy might tip the balance here? Why do you think the British have been so quiet?
So the UK government. So the UK government have been better on my father's case since the start. At the start, I'll be honest, they weren't good at all. But this administration seems to care a bit more. I mean, they say that it's the highest priority. If it is the highest priority, then surely meeting the Prime Minister will show that. But not just to the family, which is important, but more importantly to my father's captors, to show that this is a man that we care about, this is a man that they can't keep persecuting, and that this whole trial is entirely a sham trial, because under no world are the freedoms that my father stood for, standing up peacefully for those freedoms, a crime.
Yeah, tell me about the nature of this trial. I mean, this thing has stopped and started so many times. What does it tell you about the case and the nature of the people that you're dealing with here?
I mean, you know, obviously it's been a horrible 4 years for my father, but this trial has essentially exonerated him. They had all these allegations coming in about how he was, you know, doing this for, you know, what financial reasons, which is it's mental gymnastics. That's insane. And that he was, you know, this black hand behind the protests or whatever it is. So we are in a trial now where there's 3 government-appointed judges, allegations of a government witness being tortured, and they have found that not only did my father not do this for money, he did it because it was the right thing to do. In fact, if he did this for money, he wouldn't have stayed in Hong Kong to protect his journalists. They've also found that whenever he met with students was to tell them to be peaceful. So not only was he not this black hand, he was this moral force. And he never called for, you know, extremist views or Hong Kong independence or whatnot. It was always democracy as promised under the Joint Declaration.
And I know, as you mentioned earlier, his faith has become such a support for him, really the foundation of his continuing his life in prison and being a source of hope for so many around the world. Is he allowed any contact with priests at all? Or I imagine they deny him the sacraments as well.
Yeah. So from my understanding, he can't go to Mass. Regarding Eucharist, he for long periods, he has not received Eucharist. Now, I don't know if they've given him Eucharist since then, but for a long period, of years on end, he has not received Eucharist as a way to spite him. And look, this is a man who, in solitary confinement, it's him and God. And actually, there was a beautiful moment, or bittersweet, I should say, where he was on the stand, and these government-appointed judges are just shouting at him. And he stops for a second and looks at them and says, in the end day, the truth will come out in the kingdom of God. And that's good enough for me. Mm-hmm. And a man who had so much, who gave up so much, for him to say that, it's just, you know how important religion is to him. You hear it in his voice, you see it in his actions, and the fact that he wouldn't be able to go to Mass. It's just, it's a bit of humanity that they're denying him.
It's a hardship. No, this is why I say he's a white martyr, because you have elements of the church, his own government, and other people who should be speaking out. They've been relatively silent about his case, and he's suffering there as an emblem. I know from people who live in Hong Kong what an emblem of hope and faith he now represents. And look, among my treasured possessions, Sebastien, is a image of the crucifixion that your father drew in prison and sent to me in a letter. And it's drawn in pencil and pencil colors, and it's such a beautiful example of his faith. And I know I'm not the only one who received these. He sent them to multiple friends around the world as a sign, I think, of the deep faith that still pulses within him. And look, you mentioned it a moment ago. Jimmy Lai, your father, is diabetic. His health is deteriorating in prison. Does he have any access to doctors? Do you know? How in touch are you with him at this point?
So I can't go back to Hong Kong because I speak out on his behalf. Under the national security law, even liking the wrong social media post can mean that you end up being questioned by the police, or worse yet, being arrested. So I haven't been back. I haven't seen my father in the last 4 years. I would love to tell him, how much support he's getting, how many people pray for him. I think it would give him tremendous strength. I think from my understanding, he gets a prison doctor. He doesn't get independent medical advice.
And people should realize he's in this is in the summer. This prison, it's not properly air conditioned. He's under terrible circumstances, and in many cases, he's alone. So, I hope that will arrest people's attention, and certainly those in the positions to make a difference and to raise their voice in the United States, in all the free countries of Europe, and in the UK. And I know they listen, and members of the cabinet and the parliament listen to the show. Please act. This is your moment. And that ill-advised and still secret, Sebastien, Vatican-China deal, it was instituted in 2018. Inexplicably, it allows the CCP input in the appointment of Catholic bishops. Talk to me for a moment about the Vatican's odd diplomacy with the communist Chinese. This must be particularly vexing for you and your family. Give me, first of all, your thoughts on the deal, and secondly, have you reached out to the new Pope and this Vatican to raise its voice in defense of your father?
Yeah, I mean, the deal has been incredibly heartbreaking. I mean, you would see how, with Cardinal Zen, I'm not going to speak more about Cardinal Zen, but look, being able to name bishop is the ability to do that is holy. It's not something that could be franchised out or farmed out by some government. I mean, it's incredibly heartbreaking. I mean, obviously, I'd be incredibly grateful and honored to meet the new Pope. I think him adding his voice to call for my father's release, him showing support in such a clear case, of a persecuted Christian, would give many people in China hope, and would definitely give my father hope, and I think would put pressure on people to finally release him. If he's watching this, I really do hope that I get to meet him, or that he at least calls my father's release. It would mean the world.
Well, in the past week, I believe it was Sunday, he called for prayers for the people in China and the unity of the Chinese with the Holy See. That was an interesting departure, something we have not heard in many a year. So I hope Pope Leo, moves on not only this case, but moves to take a serious and hard look at that Vatican-China deal that needs revision, if not, complete abandonment. It needs to be thrown aside. The Bradley Foundation, on a happier note, here in the United States, has named your father its honorary prize winner for 2025. The prize is bestowed on individuals whose extraordinary work exemplifies the Foundation's mission to restore and strengthen and protect the principles and institutions of American exceptionalism and honors the ideals of the Western tradition. Sebastien, what does this honor mean to you and your family? And I suppose your father's not aware of the honor at this point.
I don't believe that he's aware, but I know that he would be incredibly honored to receive this award. I mean, it just shows that there are people that care about what's happening in Hong Kong, and that's what's happening to my father. And in the end, a man's courage to give up everything that he has to stand for what is right, it reverberates through time. And I think that's an example of people seeing that and honoring him with this wonderful award.
Yeah. Well, before we let you go, what can viewers do to help support your efforts to free your dad? I know you're leading the Free Jimmy Lai campaign on social media, hashtag Free Jimmy Lai, and you have Support Jimmy Lai on X. What else can people do?
Please, write to your congressman. Just tell my father's story. My father has a beautiful story, and a story that for many Americans and people who love freedom should speak to deep inside. And if you can, next time you're in church, just say a little prayer for him, light a candle for him. I think, just in some sense, the Hong Kong government wants to tell him that he's fighting by himself in his little cell. But he's not. He's fighting for everybody. He's fighting for everybody's freedom. So I think just lighting a candle and praying for him is a reminder of that.
Well, Sebastien, you can see his spirit alive in you, and our prayers are certainly with you, your father, the entire Lai family. Our congratulations on this honor, the Bradley Prize, but even better would be the release of Jimmy Lai, which we continue to pray for. Thank you for your time and for being here, and please stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, sir.
This week, I sat down with legendary comedian Tom Dreesen on the Arroyo Grande Show. We talked about the 14 years he spent opening for Frank Sinatra, what Sinatra taught him about showbiz, the role of faith and friendship. Here's a bit of that conversation. Tell me about how Sinatra came into your orbit and he loved your material. Why?
Yeah, I'll tell you how it happened accidentally. I'm touring with Smokey Robinson. I'm working in Lake Tahoe at Caesars. Frank Sinatra's appearing at Harrah's next door. Well, I had worked Harrah's many times, and so I'm with Smokey for 1 week. Again, divine intervention. So after my show at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, I bolted out the side door as I'm running into the showroom because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. So I'm running to go in there, and Holmes Hendrickson saw me. He said, "Tommy, come here." I reluctantly went over. He said, "Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin." Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer, a very powerful guy in our business. He said, "Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen, and I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra." And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard it a million times. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He said to me, "Hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? I said, "Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? He laughed. He said, "Ooh, I like this kid." They gave me a week with Frank at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. The second night there, we went out to dinner afterward. Frank and his wife, Barbara, took me out to dinner. I can remember like it was yesterday, Ray. He set his knife and his fork down. We're sitting just like this. He set his knife and his fork down. He said, "I like your material, and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested." And I didn't say, "Let me check my calendar." I said, "Yeah."
Yes, sir.
It turned into 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year, a friendship that I stayed in his home 6, 8 times a year, toured with him all over, drove with him in his car till the sun came up night after night. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral, and I miss him every day of my life.
In the book, you describe that going to Mass with Sinatra and he making you work at the Mass.
Well, St. Francis of Assisi down in, if you ever go down in the desert,
Yeah.
that church is an exact replica of the St. Francis Church in Italy. Wow. And Frank Sinatra and his mother wanted to build that church, and he did shows and raised a lot of money to build that church. So that's when I was down there with him. We'd go to Mass there on Sundays. But one particular time, he says, there was like 20 house guests. And he said, all right, we're all going to Mass tomorrow. All the Catholics had to go to Mass. The Jews and the Protestants could stay home. They were kind of happy about that. So Frank, we go there and we get to church, and Frank said, by the way, we're going to read the gospel today. And I said, why are we going to read the gospel? He said, because they want lay people to do that, Tommy. But first of all, the priest says, we're sitting on the altar, and the priest said, reading from today's gospel will be Mr. Gregory Peck, Mr. Roger Moore, Mr. Frank Sinatra, and Mr. Tom Dreesen. And the whole church began to buzz, who's Tom Dreesen? So now I had
the pressure's really on.
Now I got to follow Gregory Peck. When Gregory Peck reads the gospel, people say, "Didn't he write this?" I think he's God. I had to follow, and I got through it. Now at the end of Mass, we're ready to go. As you know, the Catholic priest said, "Go, the Mass is ended."
All right.
But he said, "But before you go, perhaps some of you may have seen comedian Tom Dreesen on the Tonight Show talking about his Catholic school upbringing. Maybe he'll honor us with a joke." Frank said, "Get up, tell him a joke."
Oh, no.
I couldn't think of a joke to tell in church. I'm going to the pulpit and I'm thinking, God, no, I can't do that one. No, I can't do this. And finally I said, many years ago in a parish in the Midwest, priest was serving Mass, and he turned around in the middle of Mass and he said to the congregation, "I'm the priest in this parish and I make $200 a week, and that's not enough." And moments later, the bishop was out of the sacristy. "I'm the bishop in this diocese, and I make $400 a week, and that's not enough." And up in the choir, the guy playing the organ says, "I'm the organist in this diocese, and I make $2,000 a week, and there's no business like show." And the church cracked up, and Frank said, "Funny, let's get out of here."
Good, let's leave. The entire Arroyo Grande podcast interview with Tom Dreesen is on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show, or wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple, iHeart. Be sure to check it out and subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show so you don't miss an episode. And we have a new show with the Prayerful Posse dropping Friday. Visit RaymondArroyo.com for all those links. Persecution and martyrdom have been marks of Christianity from the very beginning of church history. I mean, you can go back to Tertullian, where he writes, "The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church." And my next guest has written a new book chronicling the heart-rending stories of heroic priests, lay people, and religious brutally persecuted and tortured for their faith today in all parts of the world. Please welcome Posse member, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, and author of the new book, The Martyrs of the New Millennium, The Global Persecution of Christians in the 21st Century, Robert Royal. Bob, thanks for being here. I really wanted to do this in April when the book was released, but history kind of took over and we had a papal election, so you'll forgive me. The subject of the new book is certainly something I think Pope Leo will grapple with throughout his pontificate, Martyrs of the New Millennium. This is a follow-up to a book I remember you did on Catholic martyrs of the 20th century. Why did you set out to write this book now, and how does it dovetail or depart from the earlier work?
Yeah, actually, that book came out in 2000. And the reason it came out in 2000 is I gave a copy of that book to John Paul II on May 7, 2000, as part of the Jubilee celebration. You know, it was the millennium and the 2000 Jubilee. And so I prepared that. It just came to me. People had some information about martyrs, and one thing led to another, and I ended up writing that book and giving the Pope a copy. I was asked by Aid to the Church in Need to do a second edition of that book for this year. This year, of course, is another Jubilee year, 2025. And a couple weeks ago, when we were all in Rome, was the week that we were supposed to have an audience with the Pope and give Pope Francis a copy of the newer book. Yeah. And I said, well, we know what happened. I mean, he died. And then that week that was supposed to be dedicated to the 21st century martyrs got eclipsed by all the other things, the conclave, the election, etc. But I'm glad Aid to the Church in Need was the group. They're active everywhere in the world trying to defend Christians, help Christians get back to their historic homelands. And I'm very glad to have worked with them on this because I wasn't planning on doing it. I actually have lots of other writing projects in hand, but it was good to have done it because it reminded me that after 9/11, the whole nature of Christian martyrdom in the 20th century changed from totalitarianism to radical Islam.
Wow. Yeah, I want to get to that in a little bit, but give me a few current examples of violence and persecution. Let's start in the church in Nicaragua, which has been suffering a systematic, politically charged campaign of bloody assaults against parishes and chapels, kidnappings. We saw the expulsion of the apostolic nuncio, the exile of half of the country's bishops and many priests. You spend a lot of time on Latin America at the top of this book, Bob. What's driving that persecution in Nicaragua? I mean, this is a heavily Catholic region, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, I know a lot of people will be surprised that the first chapter that deals with the substance of martyrdom in the 21st century is devoted to Latin America. But surprisingly, the organizations that track the martyrdom of priests in particular and religious say that Mexico, surprisingly, is the most dangerous country in the world today to be a Catholic priest. And in this instance, it isn't as it was back during the Cristero War that the government was persecuting the church.
Right.
This is the result of cartels, human traffickers, drug traffickers, and anybody who steps in front of what those criminal organizations are trying to do puts himself at risk. Now, in the case of Nicaragua, we all remember way back in the 1980s when John Paul II was in Nicaragua, and there was an ideological struggle going on between the Sandinistas and the church there. And they tried to shout him down at his mass, and he kind of heroically stood up and said, "Silencio!" We all remember that moment. And at that time as well, the people who were running Nicaragua were Daniel Ortega and his wife. And after various changes of government, they're back in power. And now it's not so much a matter of Marxism as it is a matter of a family wanting to control a country in which the church is the only effective opposition to their tyranny. So it's not surprising they're closing down TV stations, radio stations have expelled bishops and priests. It's an old playbook, but now it's being used for the sake of a particular family rather than an ideology.
Yeah, now again, a crime family, involved in, which is what we're seeing all across Central America. It's these cartels and crime syndicates, and I would argue the Ortegas are a piece of that. On Sunday, we saw a brutal attack, Bob, by extremist Muslim herdsmen in Nigeria. We've been covering this for years, and it left dozens dead. It resulted in the kidnapping of a Catholic priest, several nuns. Bob, what do we know about this tragedy, and is the Nigerian government doing anything to help these people?
Well, look, there's marginal and very ineffective measures that the Nigerian government takes to try to tamp down some of this violence. But Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa. It's actually a wealthy country. That's the irony of it. They have lots of mineral resources, and of course that produces a lot of scrambling for control of those resources because they're very lucrative. And it's about half split between Christians and Muslims. And so these clashes, which are sometimes portrayed as over economic interests, and that does happen where somebody will accuse somebody of blaspheming against Islam, and then they seek to take over their property, their farm, or whatever it is. But really, there is also what we have to say is a radical Islamism all across Central Africa, across sub-Saharan Africa. And so something like 5,000 Christians are killed a year on average in Nigeria, with very little response by the government. Now, I finished writing my book in mid-November, and I estimate that since then, something on the order between 2,000 and 3,000 Christians have probably been killed by radical Islam or this exploitative Islam in Nigeria. And it's a world tragedy that Nigeria has been removed from the countries of particular concern by the United States. This happened under the Biden administration. That has to be corrected by the Trump administration because this is an outrage. It's the largest body count of any country in the world, and the United States should be on record as protesting against it.
Yeah. I know you've been impressed, Bob, by the African martyrs, their heroism, their bravery. What effect have these stories and chronicling them had on your own faith?
You know, when I wrote the previous book, a woman asked, I gave lots of lectures on that book, obviously, in 2000. And a woman got up after one of my lectures and asked me, weren't you depressed reading about all these terrible things that happened under communism and Nazism? You know, people being tortured, priests being humiliated and dressed up in, I mean, just absolutely unbelievable things if you start to dig into it. And I looked at her and I said, depressed? I said, no. I'd never spent so much time with so many good and holy and forgiving people. I mean, people forgiving people about to kill them, not only forgiving them, but praying for them at their very moment of death. Yeah. So every time I dip back into this subject, I find myself feeling a little bit distressed about my own weakness as a Christian because, you know, we complain about a lot of the things that rightly we are worried about in our own society, but compared to what lots of our fellow Christians, Catholic and Protestant, are experiencing around the world, it's absolutely nothing. And to read about them, the heroism, the holiness that these people manifest, the only thing that I can say is that it's inspiring. And I would encourage people, you don't have to read straight through this book. You can kind of dip into Asia or the Middle East or whatever. It's a good thing to realize that there are still people like this in our world today.
Yeah. Well, and they're willing to suffer and even die, Bob, for the sacred faith that they hold dear. And they realize, in many cases, it's the public expression of that faith on their way to Mass, in the middle of sacraments. I know bishops who were flying into Sudan, for instance. Bishop Makram Gassis, a great heroic bishop, he would fly in to do confirmations and baptisms and first communions, and he did that at peril of death. They had a death sentence on him, the local government there in southern Sudan. He did that for years. That expression, that witness of faith is something I think we all need to see. And when these things crop up that you and I discuss almost every week, it takes on, raising your voice is not a high price. You know, being excluded from a few cocktail parties, that's hardly a price to defend your faith in the things that matter most. And these people, when I read your book, I kept thinking, my Lord, they're willing to do this. The least I can do is use my platform and use my voice to do what we can. And we do that in our small way. Your research suggests, Bob, that more Christians had shed their blood in the 20th century than in the previous 19 centuries combined, and that it was communist totalitarianism then that really fueled a lot of the 20th century martyrs by sheer numbers. Writing the new book, you see the greatest anti-Christian threat in the 21st century as where? What's driving it?
Yeah, look, I'll just quote a novelist, Salman Rushdie, who is a kind of a Pakistani Anglo literary figure, a novelist, who had a fatwa pronounced against him back in the 1980s because he'd written a book, The Satanic Verses, that seemed to suggest that Muhammad had accepted polytheism, at least partially in some of the disputed verses of the Quran. Well, he had to go into hiding. He was fortunate that Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of England at the time because British special forces protected him. But he was attacked and lost his sight in one eye in Chautauqua, New York, just a year or two ago by a radical Muslim. And he said after this, I mean, this is someone from a Muslim background. He said, having survived the totalitarianism of fascism, of Nazism, and of communism in the 20th century, the 21st century woke up to find itself facing a new totalitarianism, and that is radical Islam. And this isn't just, you know, a small group of people who have extreme views. This is a point of view that really seeks to create a worldwide caliphate. That's the word that they use. They think of it in terms of, you know, Christians think of in terms of evangelizing the world. Well,
Right.
and these radical Islamic figures, they think about it as establishing a kind of Ottoman Empire, but not just restricted to Turkey and a few of the lands in the Middle East, but a total empire of Islam everywhere. And while Christians used to be able to live under the Ottoman Empire, I mean, there were still millions of Christians living in the Middle East and in Turkey up until the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Now, what we see is that the willingness to tolerate others living within those lands is greatly diminished, and there's just a murderous impulse to try to spread to try to create this caliphate, not only in the Middle East but in Africa. We see similar movements in Asia now. This is something that the West, in particular, needs to wake up to, because it didn't go away. I mean, we kind of defeated ISIS in the Middle East, but it's grown back. It's transferred itself to other parts of the world, and it will come back with a vengeance.
Bob, I spoke earlier to Sebastien Lai, of course, Jimmy Lai's son, the democracy advocate and really white martyr, in my opinion. Give me a sense, you devoted a chapter to white and red martyrs in Red China in this book. Give me a sense of this persecution. It seems to never end. And in the book, you explore the Vatican's shadowy policy of appeasement at this point.
Yeah, sad to say, the situation in China, I mean, it's very discouraging because our own church made a very bad bargain with a totalitarian regime. I mean, we know that when you try to make a deal with the devil, what happens? The devil always comes out on top of that because you've gone halfway to meeting him. Now, we know that compared to what China did during the Cultural Revolution and what Chairman Mao did, the numbers are considerably smaller of the people who are being persecuted, but there's a full court press that's on. We know that there are images of President Xi inside of churches. There are attempts to kind of rewrite parts of the Gospels to point it in the direction of the Communist Party. They're being more careful about creating martyrs because, of course, that raises the international temperature against China. But they do it. We know our friend Nina Shea, in her recent study, has pointed out that 10 bishops are missing. I don't know what happened with them. Yeah. They could be dead. They could be held in prisons somewhere. That's typically what they've been doing recently, but that's 10. And now we have a pope who was head of the committee in the Vatican who appointed bishops, so he's quite aware of what the problem is, and he's visited China. So it'll be very interesting to see if he is able to do anything about that terrible, what we still call the secret accord, because we don't know what's in it. But what we do know is that the Chinese have been abusing it, appointing bishops without consultation with the Vatican, even reorganizing dioceses. So that's one of the key places that Pope Leo XIV is going to have to address, and address very soon.
Yeah. Before we go, your final chapter on martyrs and persecution in the West, you mention this idea. Well, I guess we think of the West as more enlightened and tolerant, Bob, but you found rather virulent forms of persecution and martyrdom, not only in Europe, but here in the United States and Canada as well. How does the Western version of religious persecution differ from other forms, both in tact and subtlety?
Yeah, I want to say we should not consider ourselves to be exempt from this kind of persecution. Now, we do have, of course, radical Islamic figures in Europe and in the United States, Australia, all the countries we normally think of as the West. There's a group in Vienna that's the Observatory on Anti-Christian Acts in Europe, and they use Europe's own definitions of hate crimes, and they find 700, 800, 900 cases per year of anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe. France alone loses about 2 religious buildings a month. We never hear about this, of course, in our media here in the United States. England, we know, has been arresting people for praying silently outside of abortion clinics and such things. Here in the United States, just in this past week in Seattle, I mean, this is kind of a telling thing because there is an anti-Christianity, an anti-Christianity that defines our Christian beliefs as hate. And I think we want to pay some careful attention to it. There was a kind of a festival in Seattle just this week in which, kids were being giving haircuts, and there were rides, and there were all sorts of things. But there was also an attempt, I think one of the slogans of it was hands off our children, or keep away from our children. And a radical LGBT group came up and attacked them. Some of them were arrested. Some of the people who were attacked were arrested. And the mayor of Seattle said that Christian group had brought this on itself because it is a hate group. Well, this hasn't quite reached the level of our government using this, although we've seen the way our government tries to put pressure on the Little Sisters of the Poor and other Christian groups. I think we in the United States need to be vigilant about our own societies, because there clearly is a large segment of our elites and just of ordinary people who want to define Christianity as something evil. And unfortunately, I don't think our bishops and our other Christian figures and Christians in public affairs are willing to stand up and say no, that this is a matter of religious liberty, that Christianity is not just a matter of hatred. And I mean, you can disagree with Christians about LGBT or whatever it is, but you can't show up and begin to beat people up and to create disorder in the society.
Bob, thank you for bringing clarity and attention to these martyrs and the ongoing persecution that I don't think anybody spends enough time focused on or looking at. Martyrs of the New Millennium, the Global Persecution of Christians in the 21st Century, published by Sophia Press, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Robert Royal, we'll see you next time with the Posse. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond.
This weekend, we lost the patriarch of the Duck Dynasty clan, Phil Robertson. Robertson passed away earlier this week at the age of 79. The Robertson family announced back in December that Phil had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He was a former teacher, a commercial fisherman, before inventing the Duck Commander brand of duck calls, which of course turned into a multi-million-dollar business empire and launched the A&E iconic TV hit Duck Dynasty, which revolutionized reality TV. It was one of the most watched reality television shows of all time. Phil Robertson joined me on set back in 2017 to talk about what was ailing American culture and the faith and family values that really made Duck Dynasty the beloved hit that it was. Take a look. It was one of the few shows, Phil, for so many. There are so few shows a family can gather around and feel affirmed.
It was a glimpse, and I know people that thought they had gone away. It was actually a glimpse of a functional family where there was no cursing or bitterness or hatred, and we get along, and it was real. That part was for sure real right there.
And that family prayer at the end over meal, that was really, that became the hallmark of the show. That was like Carol Burnett's sign-off.
Which is
what
amazing.
People looked forward to. And
one little prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the food you've given us, And at first, when I would say, in Jesus' name, amen, I got to watching, and someone says they're leaving out the Lord's name in your prayer. I said, they were cutting in Jesus' name out, where I just were saying, amen. And I asked him about it. I said, why would you do so? What kind of mind would do that? And they said, well, we didn't want to offend anyone. Maybe the Muslims would be offended. And we just thought, I said, and you're cutting? I said, if you don't put that back in there, I'm fixing to check it to the whole bunch. You can get to the rest of them. You don't do what you want to do. So they loosened up and put it back in. But when you're arguing about whether you pray in the name of Jesus or not in the United States of America, I'm like, come on.
In your own house.
Give me a break. In my living room.
Our prayers go out to Willie and Corey and the entire Robertson family at this difficult time. May Mr. Phil Robertson rest in peace. That is all the time we have for now, but be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.